I'm an American-born woman, but my mother was born in South Africa, having immigrated in the 90s. Growing up, she always taught me to be on guard and to be extremely cautious. It was simple things, like driving up to the ATM at night. While my mum was using the machine, I had to look out of one window while my sister would look out of the other, so that we could see if someone was coming. I had always wanted to visit South Africa, and when I was 17, I went as a graduation present. I ended up staying with my grandparents, who were both in their late 70s. My grandmother was hell-bent on showing me as much of the country as possible, even though my grandfather's Alzheimer's was worsening and travelling was becoming harder. Regardless, though, we took off from Johannesburg towards Cape Town. We would drive up to 6 hours at a time, and anyone who's been to South Africa knows that you can go hundreds of miles and see nothing but grass. It was incredibly beautiful, but also really eerie. Once we drove into wine country in the Cape, we began passing signs that said, "Don't pull over for people selling grapes," as we were near vineyards and people would steal grapes and then sell them on the side of the road. Around hour 3 or 4 of the day, my grandfather was getting antsy. He was obsessing with the GPS of the car, plugging it in and unplugging it, cursing and getting frustrated. Eventually, the thing just kept repeating, recalculating for hours on end. My patience was wearing thin, and I was trying to take it from him so I could fix it, but he wouldn't let me touch it. Finally, my grandmother had had enough and pulled over. This stretch of road was narrow and lined by trees. It was probably mid-afternoon by now, but we were the only car in sight, and it was completely silent. My grandparents were reading the GPS instructions and arguing when my grandmother turns around. "Keep watch out of the back window." I kind of smiled to myself, remembering what my mum used to say. I glanced at my phone, which had no service, and scrolled through my camera roll for the 300th time that day. I casually looked up and turned towards the back window, and my heart stopped. A man had come out of the forest and was running, full sprint at our car. I found my voice and yelled, "Go!" to my grandmother, and her instincts kicked in, and we just took off. We drove away, and the man was just left standing there. My grandmother explained that often, when travellers pulled over for the grape sellers, there would be people waiting in the trees who would come out and rob you, sometimes violently too. It doesn't get much more vulnerable than a teenage girl and an elderly couple, one of which was obviously suffering with Alzheimer's. All I can say is, thank you, Mum, for making me cautious. I used to get babysat at a family friend's when I was in grade school. They lived about half a mile down the street from a cult compound comprised of Satanists. And being religious and all, it was a pretty scary thought to know that these people existed in this little mountain town of about 29,000 people. I think only a few members of the group actually lived on the property because you could see a lot of cars exit at night and not come back. There were suspicions from my dad and others that some of these members may have infiltrated some of the local churches, although it was never confirmed. The point is that no one really knew who these people were. So, one Halloween, we went trick-or-treating around the neighborhood, and my sister's friend kept saying that his cat was missing, and that he thought that it had gotten onto the cult property and that they may have even killed it. They were actually known for killing cats that got inside their walls, and they had hung them from trees and everything. Being an animal lover myself, I suggested that we climb the walls via one of the trees to see if his cat was one of the ones that were up there. They had motion lights set up, so we had to be really careful. Once over the walls, we were kind of staying near their trees to get a closer look at some of these cats. Some of them had obviously been hanging for a while, but some were obviously fresh too. They almost looked like they were being used as decorations or something. He spots his cat eventually, and becomes visibly angry and sad. Emotional and erratic, he wanted to march up to the doors of their church where they were having some sort of service or something. I talked him out of that one, and instead talked him into letting me give him a boost up to the rear window to see what was going on in there. Now, these windows were pretty small, and they were up pretty high too. So I boost him up, and after a few seconds, he lets out a gasp. This kid was known for being a little bit dramatic, so I didn't know how to take what he said. But according to him, he saw a metal tray with severed fingers and animal parts, probably a cat, laid out on said tray. He jumps down and stumbles, setting off a motion light. Almost immediately, people start flying out of this place, chasing us at full speed. We managed to get back over the walls without incident, where my sister and brother were waiting. They asked us what happened, and we told them. We also told the kid's mum, and the only part that she believed was the dead cats thing. She called the cops, and they said that those people could do whatever they wanted regarding animals on their property. She didn't mention the severed fingers because she thought it was a lie. But the cops pretty much pretended that the compound didn't exist in regards to the shit that people would report about them. Their motto regarding the cult was basically just leave them alone. My little brother and I, we walked home that night, which was about 5 miles or so. After a while, I noticed that there was a green Suburban which would drive by us every 10 minutes or so. Panicked and not wanting them to know where we lived, my mum was gone for the week for army duty. I told my brother that we need to start zigzagging through alleys and such. We eventually lost whoever it was and made it home, and I ate enough sugar to stay up until morning. I never saw any of their faces or any other kind of memorable attributes, but there were over 100 members who were all part of our community. We just never knew who they were. Last night, while I was sleeping, I was awoken up by the sound of heavy breathing. I was on my side facing away from my boyfriend, who was sleeping in the same bed. At the same time, I felt incredibly uneasy, and like someone was in the room with us. I rolled over and clearly saw a figure standing over my boyfriend, looking down at him, and breathing heavily. The breathing, it almost sounded like snarling, it was so intense. I immediately started yelling at it to go away, and just to leave him alone. I don't remember exactly what I said because I was just barely awake and frankly terrified. But I threw my body over his and reached over to turn on the light. I looked away to turn on the light, and when I looked back, it was gone. My boyfriend woke up and was trying to comfort me. I was in hysterics, bawling my eyes out, and I never usually cry, so this was odd for me, and asks me what happened. And while I was explaining to him what happened and what I saw, the light turned off by itself. It's never done that before. I asked my boyfriend to turn on the flashlight on his phone to give us some light in the room, and when he reached over to do that, the light just turned back on by itself. I have lived in this apartment for 11 years without any issue. However, my boyfriend has experienced many things throughout his life that are definitely disturbing. He has experienced waking up and feeling like he was being pressed into the bed, and when he said "get off me," whatever it was moved down the bed, making audible scratching noises, which his wife at the time even heard. Another important piece of history to know is that my boyfriend is a widower. His wife died suddenly of a blood clot, without any warning, almost 2 years ago. About a month before she died, his best friend dropped dead at his birthday party from heart failure. Even scarier is the fact that the week before his wife died, she saw a figure in the bedroom while they were sleeping. She never got a chance to fully explain to him what she saw because she died before she could. In this apartment, since we moved in, things have gone missing and randomly reappeared in the middle of the room months later. We've had cabinets loudly bang, the heater's been turned up and down by itself, and our cats just randomly stare at nothing. Besides this, my boyfriend has definitely mentioned before, and I have definitely noticed that whenever he gets angry, he just checks out. It's like he's a totally different person. His eyes look different, and his voice changes. He's never hurt me, and I don't think he ever will, but it's definitely creeping me out. I'm sorry if this is rambling, but I'm a little bit on edge, and my thoughts are a bit scattered. I've never seen anything like this before, and while I believed in ghosts, it was more of an afterthought than anything. I never, ever expected to see something like this, or experience this level of activity, if that's what it's called. The rational side of my brain is just going crazy, trying to explain it all. I'm female, and I believe that we're in sophomores when this happened, so barely 16. I grew up in a small nowhere country midwestern town. There are paved roads, so that's a plus, I guess. Where I lived was, at one point, the meth capital of America, so even though it's a nowhere town, it's got that blue ribbon, I guess. There was an old cemetery out on a paved country road. It had been rumoured to be haunted, and it also had recently been vandalised. A couple of friends, Parker and Cody, two very large testosterone-filled teenagers, and we were hanging out talking about what had happened at the cemetery, speculating who had vandalised it. I've always been fascinated by ghost stories and haunted places, and I also did a ton of community betterment projects, so I wanted to see how destroyed it was, so I could suggest to one of the 20 clubs that I was in to help it. I'm a chicken, so I came up with the great idea to go and check it out, because what ghost or meth head is going to get you when you have 2 football players with you, right? Sounds logical to me. I might add that this all goes down somewhere between 6 and 8 PM in the fall. It's dark, but not late. We were walking around, being respectful, mind you. We weren't the kind of kids to be jerks. We really just wanted to see how bad the vandalism was and find a ghost. We were there for about 10 minutes, and we were all checking out the mausoleum when a white, 90s-looking Jeep drives by, slowing down as if to check the place out. From where we were, we could see the road from the window, but who was driving wouldn't have been able to see us, just the car. But my gut is screaming by the way the Jeep slowed down, and I say something to Parker and Cody about leaving. We look out the other window to see the Jeep is turning around in the driveway, gravel road. Cody and I are already noping out and getting back in the car. Parker follows us to the car and gets all puffed up as the Jeep does another creep by. Parker gets in the car acting like he somehow outmanned this Jeep driver and he won't be a problem anymore. I remember seeing our faces turn to horror as, once again, it turns around in the nearest driveway. I'm freaking out at this point, and Parker turns the car on and is peeling out. We drove out of the cemetery onto the road passing the Jeep, and I vaguely remember Parker flipping the Jeep off as we pass, which pissed me off, because why poke the bear, right? What does this Jeep do? It turns around and starts following us. But not only following us, but riding our tail and flashing its brights. I'm about to start crying and I'm screaming at Parker for just not being able to leave it alone. I'm playing out all the ways I'm going to die because of the situation, and Cody is giving us play-by-play updates while staring out the back window. Parker decides to try and lose the Jeep, which was not a great idea because it was a straight road, just lots of hills, but when you're 16, that seems like the best option. At some point, we're doing 80 trying to lose this Jeep. It's slightly falling behind, but only just, still flashing its headlights and being generally terrifying. We get to the main highway that runs through town. We cut right on the highway, turn left onto a house street. We cut left again and turn into a church parking lot. Parker turns off his lights and keeps the car behind the wooden playground fence. Cody says that he can see the lights on the next street over, which means that we lost him. But wait, there's more. Parker gets the great idea to check. We obviously didn't stay friends after this, and I'm screaming, "Have you never seen horror movies? That's how we die. Just take me home." But no. Parker drives down the street that would be running parallel with the Jeep. We don't see the Jeep, so we turn back on the main highway and there are cop lights behind us. Parker pulls over and the police officer asks us what we're doing. I burst into tears and I tell the officer how some crazy lunatic was chasing us, how I thought I was going to die. Sure, I may have been a bit dramatic. Cody chimes in from the back to verify that I'm telling the truth. We're pleading for him to find the crazy person because he's probably still around. He asks me why we're at the cemetery and I tell him my name and plan about helping with the vandalism. And then, after that, I just went home. So, this happened about 2 years ago, near Garden of the Gods in Colorado. I was visiting Denver with one of my best friends, Denny, and we had rented a car for the week. We'd both been there a few times before, but always went north to check things out. And this time, though, we decided to head south to the Garden of the Gods. We explored the park for a while, and then decided that we'd explore the area a little more. We came across this gravel road that would take us over a mountain pass into a town further north, heading back towards Denver. I believe that it took us through Waldo Canyon, where they'd had some wildfires go through years ago. Maybe someone listening to this who is more local knows the name of the road there. Anyway, we'd been driving for a bit up the pass, stopping occasionally to take some pictures. We didn't see any other people on our way up and didn't have any cell service. Eventually, we got to a higher area where the road leveled out and we'd soon start our descent down the opposite side of the mountain. We'd been on this flat stretch for about 10 to 15 minutes when my friend Danny told me to stop because there were a couple of people flagging the car down and she thought that maybe they needed help. So, I hesitantly stopped the car, rolled down the window and saw two older men approaching the car. When they got to my window, my spidey senses started sending off all the warning signals. I've had to work in hotels for years and have had to deal with a lot of tweakers. And these guys, they were definitely tweakers. There was no mistaking it. Imagine the men from Deliverance when you picture them. We asked what they wanted, and one of them motioned to this creepy crappy white van behind them that was parked on the side of the road. He told us that the tire had gone flat and all they had was a sledgehammer to try and knock the tire off. We told him that we didn't have anything to change the tire. And this is when he changed his story. He told us next that the car had run out of gas. He said that his wife and baby were in the van and wanted to know if we could give him a ride down the mountain. At this point, I'm praying that Denny is picking up on these bullshit stories and doesn't say we'll give him a ride or something. And thank God she doesn't believe a word of it. She tells them that we'll stop on the way down the mountain and let a ranger know that they're stuck up here. All conversation is done at this point, and I roll up my window and start hauling ass down the road. Denny tells me to go faster and to not stop for anything or anyone. She didn't have to convince me. I was driving as fast as I could safely go on the gravel road. We arrived further down the mountain and spotted a ranger's hut. We stopped and told the ranger about the incident and that something was very off with these men. They said that they'd send someone up, but who knows if they ever actually did. The look in their eyes and the way they spoke to us, it was so conniving and twisted. And this was, hands down, one of the most unnerving encounters that I've ever experienced. This incident happened back in 2014 when I was last committed to a psych ward for trying to take my own life. A little background. I'm a female and was 19 at the time. I was coming off of 3 years of bipolar medication while at a peak of substance abuse, facilitated by my first year in college going crazy with new adult freedom. One night, I had a big mental episode and was committed for the first time in an adult ward. But previously, I had only been admitted into the minors ward during my adolescence for similar episodes. Within this unit, you had to share a room with the same sex, but weren't given any proper introductions or anything. The facility as a whole wasn't managed effectively, nor did any of the nurses or doctors seem to care other than to prescribe and get you out. I was led to the room that I was staying in, and the nurse just said to the other lady in the room, "Hey, this is your new roommate," and left. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s, early 50s, Hispanic and just a little taller than me. She would not keep her gaze off of the floor in front of her and didn't say a word or move when I said hi. I noticed that she had a tattoo of a cartoon version of the classic Red Devil, but as a baby. I figured that I'd just leave her alone and stick to my area of the room. The first night went as they normally do in a psych ward with a nightly group, and my roommate declined to share anything, yet again only staring at the floor, barely moving an inch. While everyone was lining up to be given their medication before bed, the ward across began to start banging on the glass of the door and screaming. One guy was smiling while banging his bald head against the glass window part, while the guys behind him were screaming and jumping around. It seemed as if they were almost going to break through, but orderlies came and took them away with their screams still lingering through the halls. Being in psych wards before, I wasn't surprised by the out-of-ordinary behavior like yelling or fights starting, but this was completely different to me. I was with disturbed adults now, people who had years of illness deteriorating their mind, not little angry kids anymore. I actually felt scared for the first time because of the high level of unpredictability with these people. I knew I wasn't all there in the head, but even these people had me anxious and made it difficult to try and get any rest at night. You know that feeling of being awake but you haven't opened your eyes yet? The moment when you've barely woken up and everything is fuzzy? This was the state of consciousness that I was in later that night. I felt like I was waking up, but as if something was waking me up, yet still tired, so I wasn't opening my eyes. The more I came to, I felt pressure on my forehead and I could sense sweat dripping on my face. I opened my eyes to find my roommate standing over my bed, staring me in the eye with one hand on my forehead and the other in a balled-up fist on her chest while she spoke in what I assume was tongues or something. I look into her eyes and they're blank and empty, no emotion. She keeps speaking faster and getting louder, and I'm paralyzed at this moment. I'm not sure what to do or what she would even do if I were to yell or move. It was only us in the room, and the nurse's station is all the way at the end of the hall. She started wiping the sweat off my forehead while still speaking fast and erratic, and I wasn't sure what she was doing or planned on doing next. She then put both her hands on my forehead, and at this point began screaming while shaking me. But not long before a nurse came in and took her off me. The nurse seemed more irritated that she had to get up to do her job, rather than concerned of how I was doing or feeling. She escorted the woman out and said not to worry and to just go back to sleep. I don't know how, but I did eventually manage to get back to sleep. I assumed that she got transferred to the more severe ward because I didn't see her again the next day, and luckily I was able to leave later that day. This incident has since been a reminder to me to never go back and to manage my mental well-being because while I have issues, I could be in a far worse state of mind, that's for sure. I still wake up some nights with lingering anxiety and have to calm myself down to go back to sleep. But I never want to go back to a ward in my life to experience this again, or something far worse. To preface this, my husband and I, we love dorky YouTube videos such as Charlie the Unicorn, Llamas with Hats, and ASDF. We've been using some of the jokes from these in our relationship for years. The one used the most is from Charlie the Unicorn 2, when the two unicorns that are terrorizing Charlie make their silly tongue noises back and forth. We do this randomly, but 99% of the time it's in our own home. So, I arrived home tonight at about 9 PM. I stepped out of the car and heard someone do the tongue noise loudly behind me. My husband goes to work at around 9:30 PM, so this is around the same time that he waits for his ride outside. I turned around, assuming that I just hadn't seen him. But there was no one there. I stepped to the end of the driveway and looked down the street, and there was absolutely no one around. I was a little weirded out, but brushed it off and just went inside the house. My husband was still home, so I asked him if he'd heard anything weird, and he said no, so I just let it go. He left to wait outside, and about 5 minutes later, he texts me, "That was you, right?" Immediately, I say no, but I heard it too. I asked if he was still there, and he said no, but now the noise was loud enough to be heard from inside the house. I walked to the window to look outside, and just before pulling back the curtain, it happened again, right outside the window, loud enough to make me jump back. At this point, I'm officially freaked out. I called my mum because by now my husband had started work and I have no one else that I can speak to this late. I double-checked all my doors and windows and made sure that my alarm was set. It continued sporadically every 2 to 5 minutes for almost an hour. My mum had the police on speed dial just in case, but they were never called. I did build up the courage to look outside a few times, and each time I did, no one was ever there. We'd just had fresh snowfall this afternoon, and other than mine and my husband's footsteps, there's no sign of anyone else having been in my yard even. The most terrifying thing about all of this is that noise has been an inside joke, shared personally between me and my husband for years. Only my close friends and family know this or have heard us do it. They all know that I have an anxiety disorder and would never do anything to exacerbate my condition or cause a panic attack. But is someone or something listening to us? It's been stopped for about an hour without reoccurrence. If it starts again, I don't know if I just deal with it or call the cops, who probably will think I'm insane. I'm looking for advice. What do you guys think that this could have been? I'm just hoping that whatever it was has moved on. To start off, I'm a male and I'm 18. Recently, I began interning at a local metal foundry in the engineering department, as my future goal is to be an engineer. This internship has done nothing but put some money in my pocket and completely deter me away from my engineering field. However, the extra $20 a day isn't bad for a high school kid, I guess. It's nothing but boring, and I've spoken to my internship director about this, but for only 2 hours a day to get paid to be bored, it's motivated me to just stick with it. My job is to look for parts and write their serial numbers down on paper for 2 hours a day. I've been doing this for months, every day. I work in a tool crib with several rooms, all filled with shelves, full of small or large parts of machinery in the foundry. In my town, around 100 years ago, there was a circus, and the company that I work for bought the old circus building in the 70s. The only room that is still in its original state is what is called the loft. To be exact, it was the room that the circus kept the lions in. Rochester Metal Products, the business that I work for, no longer has lions, believe it or not. So we keep parts in there instead. So there's been some spooky stuff at my internship. I've never believed in ghosts because I've never experienced anything paranormal before. However, 2 times now while I've been working, I've seen a strange woman dressed in strange clothes, sitting in the single chair that we have in the tool crib, drinking something. She has never said anything to me, and nor me to her. Once I said something to my supervisor about who she was, and he had no idea who I was talking about. It didn't bother me much though, as RMP has around 400 employees, and it could have been anyone. Anyone who works in the factory will know that not every employee is full of class, and there's not all that much going on upstairs, if you get my drift. However, this isn't the worst thing that's happened to me. Once, when I was in the loft looking for a part, the lights just suddenly shut off. They quickly turned back on, and I didn't think much of it. Until I began to smell a really odd smell. It smelled like an old barn filled with animal stench and feces. the lights turned off again, and this time I could hear the door slowly shutting. With no windows, the room was totally pitch black. My heart was pounding, and I was hoping that this was only a mean prank by my supervisor or something. It wasn't until I heard a low growling that I began to panic. It was faint and eerie, and the room became extremely cold. I was frozen in fear. And then I heard strange sounds, like chains, and all of a sudden I was shivering due to both fear and how utterly cold it became. The door was opened and the light came on, and I was faced with my supervisor asking me what I was doing up there with all the lights on, and how I became so sweaty. I've decided that $20 a day, it's not worth it, and have flunked out of my internship. Obviously, no one knows why, and I've just told everyone that it was boring, and that the engineering field, it just wasn't for me. Growing up in relatively rural Ireland in the 90s, there wasn't much to do other than going to the local play park. I was around 8 or 9 on this day, and my cousin was with me. She was a few months younger. We were walking along the huge green that led to the play park with a kid from the neighborhood, Brendan. Looking back now, Brendan had some sort of learning disability, but at the time, I just thought that he was a little bit slower because he was a bit younger than us. The park and green ran alongside a road in the middle of houses, and my grandparents and at least half a dozen of my aunts and uncles lived less than 2 minutes away, so I always felt kind of safe. As we walked along the grass, a van going very fast pulled up alongside us. The sliding door was already open and there were girls inside. I'd say around 18 years old, and they had this forced grin on their faces. I stopped dead in my tracks. I had this sinking gut feeling. All the things my mother had told me about kidnappings were going off like alarm bells in my head. One of the girls asked, "Hey, do you want to lift into the village?" My cousin and I looked at each other. I could feel that she was scared, so we started to back away, but she continued to try and coerce us. "It's okay. I think I know your sister. I'm going to go and meet her now. Hop in, we'll take you. She told us to pick you all up." I turned around and just ran. She was really weird and frightening, and her attempt to act so casual was disturbing. I looked around, and Brendan was still standing just out of arm's length from them as she spoke to him, urging him to get in. I said, "Brendan, don't go with them. Come with us." The girls heard his name, and then they started saying, "Brendan, no, come with us. We'll take you to your mummy's house, Brendan." After a minute of deliberation from Brendan, another car came around the bend, and the van just sped off really quickly. I've always wondered who the hell those girls were. Why were they so young themselves? Who was driving the van? Would Brendan have got in with them? What if one of us was alone in that moment? And why were they doing this in some random tiny village in a housing estate in the middle of the day? Whatever the case, I'm sure glad that none of us got in that van. Often mentioned to be one of the most dangerous jobs in America, being a delivery driver definitely has its pros and cons. Aside from the horror stories you hear of drivers being called to abandoned houses with malicious intent, being stabbed or even shot, I had no doubt in my mind that I wanted to try out being a delivery driver. My reasoning was led by the fact that it would be decent money for a college student, and I would get to go and do what I genuinely enjoyed doing, driving around, blasting music, satisfying my nicotine addiction while on the clock, and getting to explore new roads and various landscapes. I honestly just didn't think much about the dangers, but I must have subconsciously realized that the area I was going to be delivering in was mostly a wealthier business district with little crime. My sophomore year of college was over, and after leaving my previous job to focus on my heavy course load, it was time to take advantage of the summer. I was hired at the first and only place I applied to for delivery. This was about a 13-minute commute from my house, and I would be delivering in a town and city that I previously had no familiarity with. Besides the nervousness of trying to impress at the start of my new job, I was excited to get started and get in my car. I must note that I was never warned of anything or told any alarming stories by any of my management or other delivery drivers. That's because there were none. Until I landed the delivery shift 6 months later that would traumatize me and force changes in policies of this company. So, it was a normal night per usual, and I was on a delivery to the neighboring city, only about 15 minutes out. There was a confusing numbering system on the small apartment complexes that occupied the left side of the road. I had believed that my GPS took me to the right lot, but when I pulled in, I couldn't seem to find the apartment number that was listed. A nice guy was walking his cute little dog, so I politely asked if it was 22 whatever street, and he responded talkatively. He said no, sadly, in that he realizes how confusing these streets can get. Before I get a chance to ask if he knows what direction to send me in, he quickly asks an assortment of questions, none of which made me comfortable. He saw that I was delivering food and asked what it was. I had not put the light on the top of the car, so it made sense that he was curious. Not a crazy amount of places deliver around here. He then got oddly excited, asking if I had a menu, what time we deliver until, and if I'm the only one delivering on this Sunday night. After quickly answering kindly and interrupting, I asked if he could point me to the way because I was in a rush to get back. He said that he isn't too sure, but insists to walk his dog up the road while I drive out so that he could help me figure it out. After a minute or two of navigating, he said where to try next, and I thanked him, smiled, and told him to feel free to call for a delivery and I'll be back out with your food in no time. I said this because he said that he was starving and asked for a menu, and seemed so excited about the fact that we delivered. As the night came close to an end, I was hoping I didn't get any more delivery calls after 9:15. The delivery shut down at 9:30, but if a call was placed anywhere before that, I would be stuck driving and not get out till at least 10. And what do you know? An order was placed at 9:20, and I would leave with it at 9:40. At this point, I'm on autopilot and just following my GPS, not paying attention to where I might be going. As I recognize the similar street which I had only been on for the first time today, and hear my GPS say to turn left in 0.2 miles, I realize that it has to be that guy that helped me out earlier. I pull in, park, and approach the door and knock. I hear faint music that seems to have gotten louder after my knock, so I ring the doorbell. I'm greeted by the friendly man, both of us smiling at each other. I guess you decided cooking wasn't for you tonight? I say, lightheartedly in a humorous manner. He then said something along the lines of,
Cooking isn't something I would waste my time on. Plus, I believe raw food is the most authentic way to feast.
I laughed, thinking to myself that this guy is definitely an odd one. He insists that I step in and put the bags down in his kitchen. Most of the time, I don't go into customers' homes, but it wasn't too uncommon. I comply, step in, and he says to take off my shoes. Now it made me feel uncomfortable. Never have I been told to come into someone's house on my delivery job and then told to take off my shoes. This is an in-and-out job. I wasn't here to sit down and kick up my feet or anything. I figured this guy just had some issues or OCD, so I slipped my shoes off, my eyes fixed on this strange runner, small carpet next to a shoe rack that was made of what seemed to be black feathers. Simultaneously, I was also listening to the song that he was playing, which gave me a sense of real discomfort and anxiety. It was scarily familiar. I almost felt as if I was experiencing the feeling of deja vu or something, in fact. I follow him to his counter and place the bags down, next to what looked like a stuffed crow nativity scene. He sees me examining it and says,
Did you know when a crow dies that a mob of 100 live ones will gather in a ceremony? It's their way to learn about threats, and they hesitate to revisit locations where they've encountered a dead crow.
I pulled out the payment slip for him to sign and shook off his previous statement, saying, interesting. As he signs, he continues the subject and says something about how he thinks that we can learn a lot of lessons from the behavior of crows. I thanked him for signing, and as I moved to walk out, said that I'll have to look into that, hoping to shut him up about his obsession with crows. As I'm putting my shoes back on, he says,
Hey, one last thing. If I said that someone was killed here, would you be hesitant to come back? If I said I was responsible, would you revisit this location?
I panicked, sped out and fled to work with thoughts rushing through my head. A couple of sleepless nights after that, and 5 months later, and the run-in continues to haunt me. Looking back, it seems as if he saw something about me that made him want to know if I was the only delivery driver working. After telling him our close time for delivery, it seemed like he purposefully planned to wait till the last possible time, ensuring that he would be my last delivery. I still think about what this man is up to every time I work. And I really do think that he was planning something for me. This happened to me during the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, until I moved due to the fear of living alone in my apartment. I'm a 22-year-old British female, and have been living in Japan since April 2015. The apartment I first lived in was rented out by a company connected to my school. It was not a good apartment at all, but at the time, I didn't know what the general quality and size versus price of Japanese apartments were, and I got given one of 5 that I chose before I moved. The apartment was seriously tiny. 1 room, kitchen connected and bed about 2 steps away from it. I could walk the length of my whole apartment in about 10 steps, in fact. But I was excited because it was my first time living alone and in a country that I'd previously only dreamt about living in. After about a month of living and studying in Japan, I met my ex-boyfriend. He told me that the area I lived in was not a good one, and known for inhabiting creepy people, so warned me not to walk alone at night anymore, or if I did, then to not wear headphones and to be wary. I kicked myself for the countless times that I'd walked the 30-minute journey home from the clubs while really drunk after hearing this. Japan is a generally really safe country, but not so much for females that are alone. Anyway, I'd been living there for 6 months when my best friend returned to England and moved out. He lived on my right, and this left me a little scarred because I had noticed previously that the neighbour on my left was a little bit odd, to say the least. He would constantly clear his throat as if he was coughing up a fucking hairball or something. He didn't live immediately next to me, but down the hall, so when I exited my room and looked left, his door was in full view. On the left was stone stairs going up to nothing. I was on the top floor, and if you went past the stairs, you'd be standing outside his door, and on the left is more hallway and stairs going down. I only took these stairs to do my washing. We shared machines on the bottom floor. Otherwise, I always used the stairs on my right at the end of the hall because the stairs leading to the washing machines were always full of spiders. Fuck that. So, my friend moved out, and after that, I noticed this guy a lot more. At this point, I'd never seen his face, but I knew when he was out or in his place in the evenings, due to the light that would yellow his peephole if it was on. My peephole was smashed by the previous tenant, so if he looked at mine, he wouldn't be able to tell if I was in or not, luckily. He still cleared his throat all the time, and despite having space between us, it was loud enough to sound like it was coming from outside my door. That's just how loud he did it. To be fair though, our walls were crazy thin. I didn't think of him much until I started noticing that when I went outside my door to smoke, in clear view if he were to look through his peephole, his light would suddenly turn off. The previous yellow peephole would just go black. I didn't think too much about it since I would usually go out at night, and maybe he just decided to go to bed and I coincidentally saw it every time. Anyway, one day I went out front for a cigarette, saw his peephole go black. I stared at it while I smoked, trying to pick up any changes in light to confirm or disprove my theory that he hadn't turned the light off and it was in fact blackened by his own face. I was stood up this time for some reason. I usually sat down, but I had a weird feeling this day and stayed standing. I forgot to mention that our doors are metal, so opening and closing them makes a really loud noise. I stubbed out my cigarette and put it in my ashtray when I noticed him opening his door and started coming out. I was on high alert, so I panicked a bit, but I thought, he's probably just taking his trash out or something. But then I went cold as I noticed that he wasn't holding anything at all. He just stood there, facing me. I turned slowly and as naturally as possible to go into my apartment as he started walking past the hall to the stairs and towards my apartment. The path was straight, so if he was intending on walking past me, he'd have kept his feet straight. But he didn't. His walk was angled towards me, and the space between our doors was less than 3 meters. I opened my door and he suddenly started to walk much faster. I got around my door and entered, closing it, and just had enough time to see him lurch towards my door as I slammed it shut and locked it. He stopped outside, and I couldn't see him because of my broken peephole, but I didn't hear him keep going past my door, or going back to his, so I knew that he was right there, on the other side. As I was listening intently, I saw my handle very slightly jiggle. He was trying to open my fucking door, with fuck knows what intentions. I waited for maybe 30 seconds before I heard him finally turn and just walk back to his place, and then close his door. I was obviously extremely panicked at this point, so I called my male school friend and explained everything. He asked me if I wanted him to come over, but he lived pretty far from me and it was already late, so I told him that I'd be okay. He stayed on the phone with me for a while as I calmed down. During our conversation, he asked me to open my door and close it to see if the guy would come out again. I did, opening and closing it hard, listening intently, and to no surprise, I heard his fucking door open and close again after he probably paused and stared, wondering why he heard my door but not seen me. After this, I was terrified to be in my apartment at night or go out for cigarettes. I started testing it though, leaving my room silently and smoking. His peephole wasn't black when I went out silently, thus confirming that it had been him watching me as I smoked all those times before. And then I would close my door normally after I was done and listen. And sure enough, every time I closed mine, I would hear his open. Occasionally, I heard him come to my door and just stand there, probably listening for a sign if I was in or not. One night, I was out smoking, and the creep came home as I was there. I was frozen still, staring at him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't open his door at first, just stood fucking staring at it for way longer than normal. I'd almost finished my cigarette when he finally opened it and went in. Another thing that I can't 100% say was him, but I'm pretty fucking sure. Sometimes I would smoke in the stairwell when it was raining because the rain would hit me when I stood outside my door. I smoked, put my cigarette in my ashtray. It was kind of smelly, so I left it there on the stairwell. It was the third step, the same one that I habitually sat on when I smoked there. I left it, tucked in the corner by the wall, and went inside, closing my door normally and went to bed. I knew the people that lived on my right, 1 to 3 doors down. We all used the second stairwell when we went out, not the one that I was sat on, and I know for a fact that they didn't smoke. On the left of my creepy neighbor's room was a Chinese couple that I didn't know. They and the creep always used the stairs that led down to the washing machines. The stairs that I was sat on, as I said before, aren't used because they go up to nothing and they aren't even visible unless you walk around a corner. My room was on the corner, these steps connected to it. Anyway, I go back up the next morning to get my ashtray, and not only was it now a couple of steps up in the middle, there was a cigarette butt and a scrunched up packet of cigarettes. Same brand that I smoke. I can't be sure if it was him, but that stairwell is only easily visible to us. This was all happening over the final months of 2015 and the beginning of 2016. And the thing that convinced me to finally move out was the following. I'd been out for dinner with my boyfriend and we got back after 11. To enter the gate at my apartment after 11 PM, you need a key as they lock it. I was walking faster than my boyfriend, turned a corner leading to my apartment and saw a figure stood in the darkness near the gate, waiting and watching me approach. He started to appear from the shadows, away from the apartment and towards me. My boyfriend turned the corner, and as soon as this guy noticed him, he pulled his phone out and quite clearly pretended to talk to someone on it. My boyfriend and I walked past and he slowly followed us. I didn't realize at this point that it was my creepy neighbor, but we were both silent and really wary of the situation. As I got to the gate, I noticed that it was locked and started searching in my bag for my keys. The guy came up and said excuse me and nonchalantly opened the gate and stood on the other side. I'd found my keys by this point and was holding them ready to lock the gate again. But the guy was stood as if he was waiting to see if my boyfriend would enter with me or not. I showed him my keys and said thank you and that I'd locked the gate. He reluctantly left before my boyfriend had come in, and we watched him go up the stairs, but didn't see which apartment he went to. When I saw that he'd used the washing machine stairs, it clicked that it was my creepy neighbor, and I told my boyfriend. We went up the stairs slowly, and I went first, and Peter ran the corner to where my neighbor lived. He was stood there, just waiting, staring at his door, but not opening it. He noticed me come around and turned to me, staring until he saw my boyfriend, and then he just went inside abruptly. This was the last incident that I could handle. I knew that he was up to something no good, and I didn't want to wait for anything else to happen, so I decided after that to cancel my contract, and I moved out shortly after.